Thank you, Tracy. My name's Seth Benz. I'm from Acadia National Park, particularly the Schoodic Institute, which is a nonprofit partner of Acadia National Park, and we specialize in research and education. The way that Schoodic came to be was that in the early 2000s, there was a Navy base there that tracked submarine movements through the North Atlantic. And when that Navy base decommissioned, the Schoodic Institute idea was hatched, and we've grown now for a couple of decades. We're getting close to our 25th anniversary or so. But this picture depicts the campus, which is right here, very close to Schoodic Point. If anyone has anybody been to Acadia National Park? Most people go to the Bar Harbor side. Has anyone been to the Schoodic side? Oh, about the same amount. We're the quiet side. The people on Acadia, they call us the dark side. But we get about a tenth of the visitation that they get on the Bar Harbor side. And last year it was over 3.5 million. And we were about at 275,000, which is our highest visitation in the last couple of decades. So, as you can see, our land, all of Acadia and that region is on the homeland of the Wabanaki people, who are known as the people of the dawn. So we are very grateful to be on their territory. And our mission is inspiring science, learning, and community across the changing world. So items I'll briefly touch on include a climate context, birds as bioindicators, how to pay attention. And then our two principal long-term monitoring things are Hawk Watch and Sea Watch. And I'm going to add a third, if I have time, on the Christmas bird count trends. And all of this, mind you, is about engaged science. We can't do what we do unless we have people like you to help us. Some people call that citizen scientists. Nowadays, they're talking about that as community science. So we believe in public engagement in scientific endeavors. We could not do any of the stuff I'm going to talk about without volunteer help. So the climate context is, you can see on the screen that things are changing pretty rapidly. We're blessed at Acadia because we have records of things prior to the park actually being formed. The park began in about 1917, although it was an idea before that by rusticators coming out of Philadelphia and New York City to spend their summers in the Acadia region. And because of their efforts, like the Champlain Society, people who came to look at nature, study nature, begin to list birds, unfortunately shot birds in the beginning, along with mammals and other animals. We heard Carl's eloquent presentation that sort of outlined all of that kind of stuff. But we see our temperatures rising by over 3 degrees. Precipitation is up 6 inches over a 130-year span, and sea level has risen as much as 8 inches. So the Schoodic Peninsula is very dynamic. We are at the confluence of the northern boreal forest and southern deciduous forest edging up our way. Some of our research shows us that within the next 50 to 80 years, red spruce, which is our dominant conifer tree, spruce and fir, that forest will be gone and will be replaced by deciduous trees. And that has a lot to do with what the bird community is going to look like in the future. You'll hear about that in a little bit. We're on the edge of the Gulf of Maine. You may have heard that the Gulf of Maine is a rapidly rising, sea temperature rising body of water in the whole wide world. And we're seeing all kinds of creatures expanding their range, moving out. We're seeing seabirds being greatly impacted by lack of prey items to feed on. And some of our research has to do with this one here is banding that occurs off of Nova Scotia. These 3 different lines, the yellow, blue, and green, show birds, mostly land birds, migrating straight across the Gulf to the Cape, some going off the point of Nova Scotia and down this way. But what we're interested in is the birds in green. They're banded along this route. They've been spotted here where these red circles are, and they actually cross the Bay of Fundy and come down along the coast of Maine. And we all know that migration is a complex movement of birds all across the continent. We pay attention to long-term bird counts for the reasons depicted here. Tens of thousands of birds, if not millions, many different species move in and through the Acadia region annually. The bird ecology program is at work all seasons of the year. But again, I'm going to focus in on what happens in the fall and a little bit about the winter. So, as I said, it's important to document what's happening with the birds. And because we're principally involved with public participation in scientific research, we have a strong belief in uploading your sightings, keeping checklists using eBird. We also use the Hawk Migration Association hawkcount.org. And Sea-Watch doesn't yet have it has more of a continental approach. There's a couple of public repositories, one called Trektelling, which is out of Europe, actually, but pretty much led by the Avalon, New Jersey Sea-Watch, where they see 700,000 to 1 million birds annually in the fall. We don't see quite that much. So the Cadillac Mountain Hawk Watch this year will be our 30th year. I'm happy to introduce the lead volunteer counter is sitting in the audience right there. Angie, you raise your hand. So if I leave you with any questions in mind, you can see her. She's actually been at it much longer than I have. I proposed the Hawk Watch from Acadia back in the early 90s when I was a ranger at Acadia, but then left for my career in Audubon. And I recently came back, well, a decade ago, I came back to Acadia, and folks like Angie came in with boxes of data sheets, and they shoved them onto my desk and said, here, we have all of this data. What are we going to do with it? And so that's what we've been at, processing that data and seeing what's happening. You can see on the mountain, we get about 3,000 visitors a year. That's almost 1-for-1 for the average number of birds that we see passing by Cadillac Mountain. So it's not a tremendous migratory route like you would expect at Hawk Mountain Sanctuary in the middle of the Appalachians or Cape May along the coast. You got to keep in mind that we're at the headwaters of the continental movement of these birds. And by the time they pass through, they go by us, go by Hawk Mountain inland and the coast, Cape May, they get down to birds of prey don't like to fly over water generally. So they go down along the coast of Texas, Corpus Christi, they see hundreds of thousands. You go down into Veracruz, Mexico, millions of birds, and on down to Panama, and it's tens of millions of birds. So it's really a river of raptors moving every fall, and then of course back in the spring. But the spring movement is much more dispersed through Acadia, so we don't do any watching. For that, you have to go to the southern edges of Great Lakes and watch from places like Braddock Bay, Derby Hill, those kinds of places. We have in addition to our volunteer counters, we have interpretive rangers that come from the park and do the educational piece. Generally, it's daily from 9 to 2 p.m. Those are the best hours based upon the research over 30 years. If you want to know the best directions to come on, wind directions that is, you want to come on a northerly wind. And I made this red line to go through the sort of northern quadrant here. These are when the best flights occur. So any day with some sort of northerly component to the wind brings the birds. They come because of the topography of the region. We've got these high granite balls right next to the coastline. And again, birds don't like to fly out over the ocean, so they stick to the immediate coastline. And over the years, our principal migrant is a sharp-shinned hawk, seconded by broad-winged hawk, but that's very ephemeral, if you will, depending upon which route the broad-winged hawks want to take. They fly in big kettles of birds. And this year we had a good movement. I think our highest single day count is
It's almost 1,300.
1,300 birds. Yeah. So that's a big day for broad-winged hawks for us. Compare that with one day at Hawk Mountain when I was a counter there back in the 70s. I saw 14,000 in a 3-hour time span in the afternoon. Our other bird that we see is American kestrel. So sharp-shins and American kestrels make up over 50% of our flight, followed by osprey, northern harrier, and then now we're seeing increasing turkey vultures and bald eagles. And if you want to know the best time to come, of course, we're only up there from mid-August to say November 1st or so, maybe a little into November. So you can see these different squiggly lines of the different species and the timing or the phenology when they come through. And you can see that, maybe the best time to come is somewhere around September 9th to the 20th or so would be the time frame, and you can see a nice variety of birds and peak flights of kestrels and sharp-shins. So on the far right, you see that on average, we cover about 250 hours per season. We see roughly 3,000 birds a year, 2,900. And this is a key figure to remember. Just 12 birds per hour of observation, 12 hawks per hour of observation. Keep that number in mind when we jump to Sea Watch and you see a big difference. Okay, next slide, please. So using our data as evidence, those boxes coming across the desk, we put these to analysis and we come up with our site trends of particular species. I just chose a couple here to show you. The bald eagle sightings are on the increase. This is from 95 to 2015. And if I updated that, it would keep on going. The last 2 years were records of bald eagles per season. And then we see sharp-shinned hawks, which are decreasing. And again, our daily observations are passive. We're not really capturing the birds and looking at blood samples or feather types or any of that sort of stuff. In the national park, that kind of handling of species is just not tolerated, or we're moving to some sort of experimental things, but I don't think it's going to happen with big birds of prey that are, people are coming up there to see the phenomenon. And that's really the value of what we do is having so many visitors come per day and hearing about migration and learning about this network of places where you can go to see them, and then get on the bandwagon of helping conservation-wise with what's happening with birds of prey. So our data management is of course publicly accessible through the Hawk Migration Association of North America. And even today, if you went on hawkcount.org, you could look at any of our records from any of the years of coverage on a per day basis. The observers are writing things down on an hourly basis, through 9 to 5 and longer if they stay there. And so you can go back in time and look at what happened in 1999 or 2003 and pick out a favorite day. So if you happen to have visited the hawk site and want to look back on that day's record, you could find it in hawkcount.org. Next slide, please. So we take a data set like sharp-shinned hawks. So we see that over time, sharp-shins are sort of dipping in their population trend. So these are our local results, right? Is this trend line? But if we extend that out to the network of people watching hawks migrating through the autumn of the year, look at this insect slide down here. And all the red arrows, mostly down the Appalachian mountain chain, as well as the coast, show that sharp-shinned hawks are on the decline. We are an early warning system for what the heck is going on with that. We see these population declines, and we can then go to people who are hands-on researchers who are looking at nest sites, egg production, chick production, and all those sorts of things, and get with them to at least alert them to the fact that things are failing or dwindling, and we might look at why that's happening. One of the things that's coming to light about sharp-shinned hawks in particular is in the lecture, someone asked a question about Cooper's hawks being in their backyard. Cooper's hawks will feed on sharp-shinned hawks. They are both built the same way. They're accipiters, long, rounded, or longish rudder-like tail, short, rounded wings. They move through the forest, capturing small songbirds. So they occupy essentially the same sort of habitat type. And the Cooper's hawk is just, because it was known as a chicken hawk and was persecuted through the 1880s into the early 1900s, it was trying to take people's chickens and things at their homes. And so they got shot and they were killed in big numbers. They're beginning to rebound. It turns out that Cooper's hawks seem to be a little bit more adaptable to humans. And so that fellow's question in the big room or in the auditorium was Cooper's hawks are in my backyard, I think he said. They are very adaptable to humans. They're beginning to nest in urban settings and in our backyards, taking advantage of our bird feeding stations. And so we're helping sharp-shinned hawks. I mean, we're helping Cooper's hawks to the detriment, perhaps, of sharp-shinned hawks. Also, the fact that conifer trees in general, that habitat is changing quickly. There are some forest dynamics that are occurring that may be impacting sharp-shinned hawks. So we see this decline happening through their migration routes. And this one I like to show because it tells us something about what's happening with range expansion in the Northeast, if not along in our whole continent. So we take the turkey vulture. Everybody recognizes the rocking posture of the flight posture of the turkey vulture. From the 1960s to 1980 in the state of Maine, there were very few, if any, records. There are no records in eBird for that time frame. But we do know from historical accounts that there were a few sightings here and there prior to this time frame. And in this time frame, we'll just say for eBird purposes, no records. Then we move to the next decade. In the 80s, we began to see them arriving at our latitude, the Acadia latitude, by June the 1st. That's when the first turkey vulture would be seen. And we're talking about very few numbers, right? We move to the next decade, and already they've jumped a whole month in their arrival time. So they're coming from the south, and they're coming earlier each decade. And so the annual average was May 1st through the 1990s. We come to 2000. It moves up by a month and a half to March the 15th. And then the 2000s and the 2010s, I'll say, we began to see them in February. And now, the last few years, we are seeing turkey vultures year-round in the state of Maine. So that quickly, over 60, 70 years, maybe it's a person's lifetime, let's say, we've gone from no turkey vultures to this infusion of turkey vultures. And this year at Acadia was a record number of fall migrating turkey vultures. One of the things that's difficult for the observers on the hill, on the mountain, is to separate local birds from migratory birds, because we have a local population that are apparently breeding in the area. They'll get up and mill about all through the day, and they fly over the mountain going this way, but then they come back around. And one of the most received questions by our observers is, well, how can you tell whether that's a migrant or a local? And the locals mill around. Migrants, we see them coming into view. We're up there looking with binoculars, and they're out in the distance in front of us, and they come straight in and come right over and keep on going south. Whereas the locals will get up, mill around, fly this way, fly that way, come back. And, we have our methods for trying to figure out who's who, but the best way is to watch a bird come into view and watch it go out of sight. All right. So that's a quick look at our hawk watch. We'll quickly go to migrating waterbirds at Schoodic Point. Again, we watch in the fall of the year from September into December. We watch from before sunrise, a half an hour before sunrise, to 3 to 5 hours afterwards. That's the best time to see the most birds moving through. We, again, are subject to having at least one lead volunteer monitor, and the Institute provides housing for that. That's the only pay that we get. We see roughly about 50 species annually. This year it was 86. We see between 60 to 106,000 per season. That's the total birds moving past Schoodic Point. And we had 12 hawks per hour, 245 hawks per hour of observation. So if you came up to Schoodic Point and hung out for 1 hour, chances are very good you'd see at least 245 birds going by of all different species types. Not necessarily 50 species, but you'll see in just a second how they bunch up. Right? And here it is, the species phenology, or the migration timing of certain species. So the blue line is common eider. You see there's a spike here in the very beginning of when we're counting. In fact, in August, you can see this early movement, but then the principal time frame is the month of October for common eider. And you can see that double-crested cormorant, the purple line, they come through also in October and peak somewhere there in the middle of October. So we have these trend lines or phenology timelines for all of the species that come through and pass the point. These just happen to be the predominant ones that we see each year. Northern bannets coming through all through the year. Again, if you wanted to maximize your visit to Acadia National Park, you probably want to come sometime in right around mid-October. And the percentages of flight, we see that cormorants make up the most number every year. And in the past 6 or 7 years, we've had over 150,000 cormorants of both varieties going by, predominated by double-crested cormorant. But we see a lot of great cormorants also migrating. This year was our largest, highest number of great cormorants. The scoters are, there's 3. Black scoter, white-winged scoter, and surf scoter. So that complex makes up the 21% on an average annual basis. Common eiders, little bit of a story here. They used to be in the 25 to 26% of the flight. It's dropped down to 19 over the last decade. So there's something's happening with common eiders, and their trend line is going down. And then so forth and so on. You can see the rest of the birds.
We have 5 minutes.
Okay. That's good. And this year we had our lead counter was able to stay well into December. And the yellow highlighted birds depict this late season movement. Because we were ending our season prior to this year, right around Thanksgiving, We weren't aware of the birds that at least passed this particular year. So in the future, we'll be watching all the way to Christmas. You see that, well, the late date, many late dates for almost all of the species. December 22nd was our last day of the season. But you see these peak flight dates here in this column, December 11th, December 13th, 3rd, 2nd, red-throated loons coming late in the season, and the peak number on a single day was 434 red-throated loons passing by, and we had 1,700 for the year, and so forth. You can see these other numbers. Ring-billed gulls, 503 late in the season on December the 3rd. You want to see alcids, you got to come late, and that's when they start moving, the black guillemots and razorbills. It's fun to see them flying right by Schoodic Point.
All right, I think we have just a couple
Couple
more
minutes. Okay, so
Two.
can we go to the next
Tell me where.
slide?
Okay.
So very quickly, the winter bird population at Acadia, we heard this morning 30, 60. Our efforts show that in the last 50 years of Christmas bird counts at Acadia National Park, we've seen a 43% drop in populations, and common eiders, just talked about them a second ago, they're really dwindling. These are all birds that come and flock in large groups in the wintertime ordinarily, and we're seeing their migrations drop. These four in the squares, and the herring gull is also dropping. Well, it's so very quickly, southern species are increasing, northern species are decreasing. Next slide.
Okay.
This will be it. So we have data like this on all the species that we see on our Christmas bird counts that, again, clue us into what change is happening. And the next phase of this is why. One more slide, I think. Yeah. But we also know that conservation actions work. We eliminated DDT, and we've taken care of bald eagles, peregrine falcons. Those birds are on the rise and they're coming back. Wild turkeys, supplanted by the state, are on the rise as well. And as Mary Oliver tells us, pay attention, be astonished, and tell about it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody.